On Saturday, November 11, Canadians from coast to coast to coast paused for a minute of silence to remember the sacrifice made by those in uniform in the service of our great nation. For the younger generation, Canada's 12-year commitment to the war in Afghanistan from 2002 to 2014 has put a modern face on the notion of a Canadian combat veteran. It's time to target how best to honor those Canadian veterans of the war in Afghanistan. In total, 158 Canadian service members were killed in Afghanistan. A further 2,000 suffered wounds or injuries, and countless thousands more suffer from the invisible damage of post-traumatic stress disorder. There was no victory parade when our soldiers concluded the Afghanistan deployment in 2014. At that juncture, there were howls of protest from the pro-war pundits in Canada who still argued that NATO was just one schoolhouse away from total victory.
Our one battle group for several months was the only effective fighting force for 5 provinces of southern Afghanistan.
Their collective facetious argument was that our troops pulling out of the NATO mission in Afghanistan in 2014 was akin to Canada opting out of World War II after D-Day in 1944 and leaving our allies to finish the job without us. The willful ignorance of these tub thumpers has now been exposed following the December 2019 publishing of the Washington Post story on what became dubbed the Afghanistan Papers.
A bombshell series of investigative reports in the Washington Post
of a trove of government documents.
Officials deliberately misled the public about what exactly was going on.
This collection of documents obtained under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act clearly illustrated that the Pentagon knew from the outset that the U.S.-led coalition could not achieve victory in Afghanistan. Instead of revealing that truth, senior officials conspired to lie to the public to keep them on side in supporting the conflict.
Our troops will fight to win.
We're not losing a war out here by any means.
We are prevailing.
For the die-hard Hawks, even the revelation that U.S. commanders knew it was a no-win war did not stop them from hoping for a last-minute miracle victory. In August 2021, that last dim hope was extinguished for good when the Taliban roared to victory against the U.S.-trained Afghan security forces, who simply melted away without a fight. When our troops had come home in 2014, most major media outlets had used that milestone to pose the question as to whether or not Canada's sacrifice in blood and gold had been worth the cost. These assessments had, of course, been loudly denounced by all of those pro-war cheerleaders who had spent the last 12 years selling Canadians on the war. They cried that it was too soon to tally up the losses against those gains being made in Afghanistan, as the war was not yet over. Well, folks, as of the summer of 2021 and the U.S. abandonment of the Kabul airport, one can safely say the war is over. We lost. Which means that the sacrifice and expense of the Afghanistan war cannot be justified or offset by an elusive victory. To ensure that such a failure is not repeated, Canada needs to establish a public inquiry to probe how this mistake happened and continued to happen over 12 bloody years. With the Afghanistan Papers in the public domain, we need to ask whether those U.S. officials who knew that the war was unwinnable shared that info with NATO allies, including Canada. In other words, was it American officials deliberately misleading their Canadian counterparts into believing that victory was just around the corner? Or were our Canadian leaders in on the ruse from the outset, and they chose, like the Americans, to continue deceiving the general public?
It is in our national interest to see Afghanistan become a free, democratic, peaceful, and secure country.
Such a set of public hearings could follow the example of Britain's Iraq inquiry, which is better known as the Chilcot Inquiry. This probe delved into the circumstances which led British Parliament to participate in the 2003 U.S. illegal invasion of Iraq.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons.
Launched in 2009, the Chilcot Inquiry published its findings in 2016. The report concluded that at the time of the invasion, Saddam Hussein's Iraq did not possess the weapons of mass destruction, as was falsely claimed by the US and UK intelligence.
The judgments about the severity of the threat posed by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, WMD, were presented with a certainty that was not justified.
If the British can own up to a lie that led to an illegal and disastrous war, surely Canada can do the same. Our soldiers and the families of the fallen deserve no less. This has been On Target. I'm Scott Taylor.